J. Voorhees. This is Tobias von Cthulhu the 17th's butt right here, and I hope you like the intro. I was always a big Mega Man 2 fan. Anyway, each video in this series will be on one of the pictured topics, and I'm going to try and get through the one stage selection screen worth of topics every 6 months or so. Ask me this time next year how that's working out for me. So, Mr. Carver. Mr. Carver is a character in my upcoming novel, Shadows and Games. It's my first, and it'll probably be out this coming spring or summer. Right now I've got someone booked to do copy and line editing, and I'm also looking at designers and artists for the cover right now. This particular character, as the old cliche goes, came to me in a dream. One night, somewhere between 2015 and 2017, this guy showed up in one of my dreams. I don't remember much about the dream. I just remember the look of him, and then he was called Mr. Carver. This pale, gangly man in an ill-fitting suit that was just hanging off of him, and he was so tall that his pale arms and legs were sticking out of the bottom of his sleeves and pants. The suit, it was kind of like a pinkish red color and pinstripe. I always wonder if it was from this Gomez Addams toy I had on display in my room at one point. But it was all rumpled and dirty and frayed around the edges. The tie was askew, and he had this paper bag over his head with this crude, childish drawing of a face. And I just remember thinking of the guy on the Pringles can, except in my dream the face on the bag mask had glasses, which the Pringles mascot doesn't actually have. And the only other thing I remember was that he was really creepy and had this kind of Michael Myers slasher killer vibe. When I woke up, I went to the computer and I made a paragraph-long note in a new document titled Mr. Carver. I wish I still had it so I could throw a screenshot up here, but I've changed computers a couple times since then. I can't find it anymore. It may have been lost. Anyway, I think this was only the second time in my life that I've ever written and actually used something from a dream because, as you could probably imagine, a lot of my dreams are kind of weird. So I kind of had Mr. Carver tucked away in the back of my head to use for something. In 2019, I actually made the first image of him when I created Mr. Carver miniature for a Blood Bowl team I was using for this tournament in Orlando called Friday the 13th Graveyard Cup, which kind of has this slasher horror theme. According to the rules in that tournament, everyone made up a special horror or slasher themed player. It was kind of like a create-your-own player thing. And so I made Mr. Carver for my slasher-themed team 13 Maniacs. They don't win a lot, but they like to win the award for most casualties inflicted. I used the same method creating him that I used for my old Masters of the Universe-themed army for 40K, where I started with a paper clip frame as an armature and then started sculpting onto that. Then, since I had a mini form, I decided to use him in my superhero RPG campaign set in the fictional Swamp Light City. And he was the main villain in the first session, which was done over Zoom in November of 2020 during the pandemic. I commissioned my friend Gary Radziak to create posters for the game, and he created Mr. Carver as a separate layer so I could use him for other stuff, like this. When I started thinking of Shadows and Games in 2019, I decided to put him in. In Shadows and Games, there's a group of disparate villains. I always liked the idea of the whole villain team-up, like with Legion of Doom and Challenge of the Super Friends, or Dr. Doom's team of supervillains in Marvel's original Secret Wars miniseries. Yeah, the one where Spider-Man first gets the black alien costume that eventually becomes Venom. So anyway, with these big villain teams, you would have villains from different people's comic books that normally fight different heroes, and so they each had different styles and gimmicks, and it was fun to see them all interact. So I always had this idea bouncing around in my head for a villain group that was made of not just other supervillains from other heroes' comic books, but from completely different genres of film, TV, cartoons, comic books. So you would have like a Skeletor type, a James Bond villain, and an old Western villain, Cobra Commander, a soap opera villain, the Dick Dastardly kind of Saturday morning cartoon villain, that sort of thing. And of course, since I'm a horror movie fan, one that legally changed their middle name to Voorhees, I of course wanted there to be a slasher villain in there. In my book, Shadows and Games, one of the protagonists encounters a group of them, and the Bond villain one is like monologuing and doing his whole "welcome to my lair" spiel, and she smartly refers to them all as an affiliation of Doom. And that was a little in-joke on my part because, yeah, so much of it is inspired by Legion of Doom from Challenge of the Super Friends. And the novel isn't the first time I used that group either. I came up with the affiliation of Doom for a play that I had written for children back in the 90s and when I was doing a lot of theater and teaching stuff. Now, here's a little tangent. I wrote several plays during that time getting a theater degree, though sadly none of them ever saw production in more than a workshop setting. And only 2 even saw that. But anyway, the last play I ever wrote was a children's play I wrote in 2001 called Trial of the Tarantula Man. Tarantula Man is a Halloween reference, actually, too. And all these villains in it. And a lot of the villains from the novel, like Commodore Dredd, Dark Vengeance, Wrinkle Johnny Borva, Professor Heinfroth, they were all created for the affiliation of Doom in that play. Other characters from the novel, like Roudane and Anton Blackloot, they were NPCs in role-playing games I game mastered. And then one came from both, and that was Scary Dude, who in Trial of the Tarantula Man was this guy with a sack on his head and a chainsaw. and he was based on a character from my 3-act play, Dreams of Dracula. The scary dude character in Dreams of Dracula was called Kane, and he was basically a Jason Voorhees, Michael Myers pastiche. And eventually he showed up in my Ravenloft role-playing game as sort of a combination Frankenstein's monster and Jason Voorhees. They both walk kind of slow. And there he was called Maximilian Kane, who favored tridents and pitchforks. And he was obsessed with time because of this thing called the 13th Hour Prophecy, and there was this cult, and I'll save all that for another video maybe someday if I ever get into talking about role-playing games and stuff like Ravenloft. This has been enough of a departure as it is. So Mr. Carver took the place of Scary Dude / Maximilian Kane in my little Legion of Doom. In Shadows and Games, he represents danger, death, and intensity. The most tense scenes in the book are the ones involving him, because each villain in the book is from a completely different genre. And some of those genres are more serious in tone than others, and so each of the villains has a different feel and how seriously each can be taken as a threat. Like Commodore Dredd is based on Cobra Commander, who was a real creep in the cartoon, even more so in the comic book, but still no Jason Voorhees as far as threatening goes. So while Commodore Dredd is dangerous, he's dangerous in a more cartoon villain sort of way. The mastermind of the group is the typical Bond villain type, very calculating, very suave and well-spoken. He's competent, devious, and smug, yes, but not physically threatening usually. And all this matters because the protagonist in the first book that all the villains mainly interact with is a 13-year-old girl. So with most of these guys, the reader isn't really worried about her safety so much. The bad guys are just going to chase after her and try and stop her or capture her and hold her prisoner. Most of them aren't the hurting 13-year-old girl type of villain. But Mr. Carver is different. He's not trying to take over the world. He's not trying to rob a bank. He kills people. That's what he does. From his introduction at the beginning of the book, the reader knows what Mr. Carver's deal is. He's a slasher killer that doesn't give a damn how old the victim is or how young they are, and will kill the young protagonist if he gets a chance. And so you know that death is on the line whenever she's anywhere near him. Even though a lot of the action sequences are scenes where danger is in the book, it's always kind of a swashbuckling action adventure feel. But when I wanted things to get serious, I brought Mr. Carver out. His intro is the most tense sequence in the book, I feel, because he basically really does just jump right out of a slasher movie. It's also kind of funny because none of these guys in slasher movies are the works well with others type. So when the villains all gathered together for the first time, the first thing Mr. Carver does is try to kill one of them. And the most powerful one has to put him in his place. This is a nod to the first issue of Secret Wars, where Ultron does the same thing to the rest of the villains, and Galactus has to lay him out. And that's Mr. Carver. I'm planning on doing some file cards for promotion of the book on my website, like the little character capsules that were in the back of G.I. Joe and Transformers toys back in the day, which is appropriate since the story is set in the 80s. Marvel and DC did the same kind of thing in the official handbook to the Marvel Universe and Who's Who, respectively. Basically just entries for the different characters telling you what their abilities were and what their general personality was like and their history. So that's going to be one of the things I want to do to promote the book on my website. Maybe have each new one at the end of a newsletter during the long road publication. Mr. Carver will probably be the first one of these I do because I have the artwork for him already. So I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll probably do more deep dives on more of the characters or aspects of the book as this video series goes on.
Like and subscribe where the bunny gets it.